Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome to MCRA's webinar to discuss the recent FDA layoffs and impact to industry. I think we'll give people a couple of minutes to join, maybe one more minute, but the Q&A function is open. If you have questions that you'd like to start submitting, we will be answering questions as part of our panel discussion. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started again. Good morning. Welcome to MCRA's webinar to discuss the recent FDA layoffs and impact to industry. MCRA is a global medical device diagnostics and biologics clinical research organization and advisory firm. MCRA delivers to its clients industry experience integrating regulatory clinical research, reimbursement, healthcare compliance, and quality assurance to provide a dynamic market-leading effort from innovation conception to commercialization. Of particular interest to everyone here today, MCRA's regulatory team has more than 25 former FDA leaders, providing our clients with direct understanding of the inner workings of the agency, current thinking and review practices of the technical teams, and personal connection to reviewers. MCRA offers services in global clinical research, global regulatory covering top markets including US, Europe, and Japan, reimbursement, health economics and market access, quality assurance and staffing, healthcare compliance and GDPR, cybersecurity, due diligence, and AI and imaging center. We're pleased to have so many people join us today. If you have a question, feel free to submit it using the Q&A function, and I'll try to quickly switch from my questions to the panelists to audience questions. All registered participants will receive a recording of this webinar after the event, as well as a PDF of these few introductory slides. We'll also share contact information for all presenters, and you can get in touch with us directly by emailing info@mcra.com. So I'm Margeaux Rogers, Vice President of Spine Regulatory Affairs at MCRA. I'm joined today by MCRA colleagues who prior to MCRA worked as reviewers and leaders at FDA and have unique insights into the current FDA environment. First, we have Alex Cadotte. He's VP of our Digital Health, AI, and Radiology team and has been with MCRA for 4 years. Prior to joining MCRA, he was with FDA for 6 years and most recently a team lead for imaging software as part of OHT8 Radiology and was previously a team lead for pre-cert with Digital Health at FDA. Alex specializes in FDA review of AI machine learning devices. Next, we have Debjani Chaha. Debjani is a director with our Neurology Regulatory Affairs team. She joined MCRA nearly 4 years ago, and she specializes in neuromodulation devices, brain-computer interfaces, and robotics for rehab. Prior to joining MCRA, she was at FDA for over 6 years as a lead reviewer in the Office of Neurological and Physical Medicine Devices and as a real-world policy analyst. She has a PhD in biomedical engineering. Finally, Eric Sussman, Director of Biocompatibility on our Regulatory Affairs team. He joined MCRA 3 years ago. Eric has a PhD in biomedical engineering, and prior to MCRA, Eric spent 10 years serving in CDRH, first as a postdoctoral fellow and then as staff in OSEL. There, Eric led research and performed regulatory review in biocompatibility, materials research, and nanotechnology, and was the lead of FDA's chemical characterization working group prior to leaving the agency in 2022. Eric assists MCRA's clients in developing biocompatibility strategies for U.S. and international submissions. So just to set the stage for today's panel, our intent in holding this webinar is to share what we've learned with industry so we can have mutual understanding of the evolving situation at FDA and can adjust regulatory strategy accordingly. We're not here to speculate. The information that we're sharing today is largely based on our personal experience, but also what we're hearing from FDA contacts and information from news sources. However, we all know the situation at FDA is changing daily and is opaque to even those within the industry. So here's what we do know from our current experience. FDA has pulled certain guidances from their website, including CDRH strategic priorities through 2025, as well as guidances on diversity in clinical trials and sex-specific differences. You can use the Wayback Machine to access old guidances. FDA is still having meetings, mostly remote. However, in-person meetings are available. We're having in-person meetings with our clients. And FDA is still accepting all submission types. For the most part, we're not seeing delays in review timelines, but we have heard that delays on Q submissions are coming for certain teams. We have seen review teams change as a result of layoffs, even in cases where members were rehired, and we can speak to that a bit more. And we have seen delay in activities requiring management review and believe this may be due to management focus on adjusting as a result of layoffs and related activities. So now that we've set the stage, please feel free to send us questions, but I'd like to start with a question for Alex. You work in the AI digital health space, one which was hit hardest by the February 15th layoffs. What are you seeing as the initial impact, and how do you expect this will affect AI machine learning device review?
Thanks for the question, Margeaux. There's a number of different levels which review teams have been affected. A lot of lead reviewers that were let go and brought back, they've had their queues cleaned out. So essentially, you may be experiencing a change in your reviewer if you have an active submission at the agency. Probably for AI machine learning device functions, where there's still a little bit of an unknown, is a lot of the experts in the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratory were hit pretty hard by the way that the layoffs were carried out, because most of those people use our staff fellows and others that basically got caught up in this type of layoff. So to my knowledge, some of those folks have been brought back, some of them have not. These are often the people that are serving as subject matter experts for FDA, which can be a big loss. So, and also probably the third thing that I'll mention here is that the digital health organization kind of had a similar experience where people were lost, and then some of them brought back in various capacities. So often a lot of the support that was provided to lead reviewers was often in often cases, now those resources are a little bit more scarce. Some of those resources are looking at leaving the agency. So there's just going to be a bit of instability. Probably the biggest thing is FDA losing its capacity to kind of learn more about what's going on in the AI machine learning space. So I would just expect the agency to be a little bit more generic, maybe a shorter attention span when it comes to these types of devices.
Okay, so even with the rehiring, you are not seeing things back to business as usual. There's still a lingering impact.
Yeah, the lingering impact, even, for example, a lead reviewer, we'll take them as an example that was let go and then brought back. A lot of times, definitely thankful for industry for their interest in these folks and trying to find them a home. But when they were brought back into the agency, there was often a conflict of interest with some of the files that they were working on. So in a lot of cases, these review staff, in some cases, they're trying to figure out what they're going to do next, whether they're actually going to stay, whether they're going to go. Um, so it's not just a simple, oh, we're back. There's ethical considerations, there's personal considerations, and then also they may also may not have the full review team that they had before, even if they can pick up where they left off. Some of the members that they'd had of the review team that they were consulting with may not be there either. So there's just a lot of ways that those particular things can have an effect on your individual submission.
Right. Okay. I imagine you have clients on the line or clients in this space. How do you think this will affect new technologies getting cleared, like foundation models, large language models?
So the OSEL organization, especially the Division of Imaging Diagnostics and Software Reliability, was kind of the cornerstone of FDA's efforts for AI machine learning, along with their peers in digital health. Both of those organizations were hit pretty hard. Luckily, the agency has got quite a bit of experience in AI machine learning over the years, but these new technologies that are evolving and coming to market, I think, what I would say to my clients and, others out there is you're going to have to do a lot more hand holding, have a lot more patience with review staff here because in many cases, they just may not have the same depth of expertise that they had previously. Their bench of various reviewers and such. In some cases, the DITSR organization I heard had as many as 50 to 75% of their staff lost, and not all of that staff is back. So that could often mean delays not only for radiology, but these groups were the cornerstone of learning about AI machine learning across the agency. They were often brought in as consultants for a lot of these new technologies because for things like foundation models and especially large language models and how they would be used in future devices, there's a lot of thought going on at the FDA about whether, how to regulate these types of devices. And, my advice here would be not only patience, but making sure that you are taking the extra time to um, basically offer your review team a walkthrough of your device, the technology, that's going to be in direct conflict with the ability of FDA to accept Q subs. So overall, it's just going to be harder for FDA to learn and adapt, and it's often going to delay these new technologies to market.
Right, right. Devjani, I know you have a project where the 510K lead reviewer was part of the initial layoff, and it came shortly before a decision point or a request for additional information. I guess, how did you all navigate that? Do you have recommendations for how companies should be navigating submissions, given the uncertainty due to layoffs at CDRH?
Yeah, thanks, Margot. I think, in general, what some of the best practices that we have in our team is really reaching out to the lead reviewer, CCing the AD, and asking them, like, hey, we understand that there has been some changes within the FDA. Can you help us understand the impact of these layoffs and what can we do to make the efficiency of this reviewer, right? So you have new review team members joining. What we started to do is for a number of my clients, we held walkthroughs of the submissions. So new team members can be up to speed on at least especially if they were complex, like what are the different parts of the submission. Um, and then we also had really, I think part of that interaction needs to be, or any really submission that you submit, your regulatory history has to be solid. That's going to speak volumes to what you have already kind of worked through with the FDA, what remains to be focused on. I think moving forward, we're going to hear a bit more on this, but pre-submissions may be a little bit trickier in terms of timelines. They're still available, but what we're hearing from some teams is that the pre-submission timelines may be longer. And, just using them very, very strategically Before, I think we didn't really used to blink at submitting a pre-sub. We understood the timelines, we understood kind of the interaction schedules. That may not be the case anymore. So use them very strategically. I think as well, I've started to tell my clients, like, look, if there is a downsizing of FDA staff, we're going to see a lot of disapprovals. We're going to see a lot of NSEs. Um, and that's okay in terms of, you can view it as a narrowing of the deficiencies that you need to get to clearance or marketing authorization, right? So, it might be somewhat of a pre-sub actually, where you're actually, but those deficiencies are tied to a decision, which it holds a lot more weight, right? So, um, I think in terms of what you said, Margot, about just management, they now have a lot more on their plates on trying to understand how to organize their review teams and still meet some of the requirements that are being put on them. A lot of when you're in a marketing submission, you have a lot more handles to pull when you need management kind of oversight on your submission, right? So you have the least burdensome flag, you have an appeals process. I hope none of you guys need to be in that situation, but also, those might be ways to help you interact with them in a just much more responsive manner, right?
Right.
And I think the last thing that I would say is, you know, a lot of times what may happen, whether your review team has changed, whether you have a current submission right now or you plan to do a future one, when I was at the FDA, there was a lot of work and not enough reviewers. They really amped up hiring in order to offset some of those. But what ends up happening in that case is that, it's whoever you can find, you really are trying to assign work to because you need to meet these goals. And in those cases, sometimes what ends up happening is you have a lead reviewer who's very smart. They're willing to work with you, but you may need to educate them in terms of your device type, the regulatory history, even guidances and policies. They may not be aware of that, and to really have that patience to be able to do that, I think is going to be really important.
Right. I'm hearing, be a really strong historian and advocate for your file, but also making sure that you too understand regulatory precedent so you
Yeah.
can advocate in that way and bring FDA history to the conversation if you're working with you or lead reviewer. Okay, those are, yeah, great recommendations. And Eric, in the past, biocompatibility reviews been handled at the team level, while sometimes subject matter experts from other parts of the center have contributed to these reviews. So just given that dynamic, what are you seeing? What sort of impact are you seeing now, and do you expect?
Yeah, thanks, Margot, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about my favorite technical topic, biocompatibility. At this time, we are basically seeing no significant changes from the submitter side. It seems to be that the level of biocompatibility review is similar to what we've seen in the past, and we also haven't observed any significant policy changes. Um, as I think many are aware, biocompatibility is an area of very careful review by FDA. And it's an area where a lot of sponsors spend a lot of time and money to get it right. And so, and I think from FDA's perspective, there's there's not going to be any, I don't think there would be a mentality that any lower biological safety, that there would be a lower biological safety threshold. So we think biological safety is going to basically remain just as important in FDA's eyes. And it's important for us too when we're designing strategies to address biocompatibility. We of course want to be thorough and address any potential questions. What this means when approaching FDA now, again, getting back to what was mentioned earlier about pre-submission strategy, a lot of times sponsors in the past have, because of different time or money constraints that they've experienced. They've worked with FDA to come up with biocompatibility plans that were perhaps more streamlined, a little less burdensome, um, and sought ways to reduce the amount of testing or the time it would take to complete testing through justifications. But moving forward, I think it's important to be choosy about what exactly what's going to be discussed in a pre-submission. Um, you can certainly take these strategies to FDA and have those discussions, but realizing the limited bandwidth that FDA might have, you might also want to think about alternatives such as designing a very robust strategy, one that you can be confident in, and one that doesn't necessarily need to undergo a lot of back and forth discussion with FDA to arrive to a mutually agreeable plan.
Right, right. Yeah, and certainly a great time to make sure you're working with test labs that are experts in this area and also expert advisors. Thanks, Eric. I'm going to start going to audience questions, and please keep them coming. Alex, I think this first one's for you. Does the impact to review capabilities for AI machine learning extend for expertise for cybersecurity?
So I haven't heard about or heard from cybersecurity review staff specifically. What I do know, kind of more in a general sense, is that teams and organizations within FDA that basically have a high turnover, so especially people that have been hiring recently, maybe bring people in as staff fellows for more kind of short-term assignments. Oftentimes, this kind of is the makeup of the cybersecurity teams at FDA. There's various places within the organization that handle this. Some of my colleagues, they have been there kind of running these for a long time, so obviously they weren't impacted by this type of layoff. However, anybody that they had brought in that was new, especially with cybersecurity, there's always this desire to bring in people from the outside world to help kind of keep FDA fresh on cybersecurity. So I think those are the people that are most likely to have been impacted. And I'm speculating here a little bit, but they also would be the most likely to have been let go in the way that the layoffs kind of went down. And this is true for teams outside of cybersecurity. Anywhere that you have kind of a high turnover on a team or various impacts like that, you may see some scarcity of resources. Kind of the other piece to this is that a lot of the people that I know, even in the technology space, the morale isn't that great. So at the same time, you may have people that weren't impacted directly, but they are choosing to leave. So adding kind of those things together, I think it's likely that they have made attempts to bring people back from the cybersecurity perspective, specifically. How effective that bringing back people is kind of remains unseen. So
Sure.
I would
And
expect there would be delays, and gradually over time there may be a lessening of expertise and more of a reliance on guidance as opposed to specific situations. So you may find that your review comes back a little bit more like a template deficiency in situations like this rather than being specific to your device. It's likely that FDA would triage this staff based on the risk of the device for some of these cybersecurity concerns.
okay, okay. And that's one place, we get in being consultants and seeing across many different files, we're able to really spot when we get a template deficiency. And then also have the opportunity to have worked with other companies to try to overcome that deficiency. And I think that's one place where maybe working with advisors who similarly can see across different files may help there and may help you know if what you're getting is specific to your product or if there's another way that other companies are getting through that. Okay, and I see another question from John Montgomery. Are the changes mostly just staffing, or are you seeing strategy or leadership changes? And I think we're certainly seeing leadership changes. Rusty Segan was part of the layoffs, and we have someone acting in that position. Have you all seen any other leadership changes?
I've seen key personnel either choosing to leave on their own accord or either got caught up in the layoffs. Quite often, these are people that have leadership roles kind of within their own either technical or patient oriented area. So we are seeing kind of an increase in just people in those senior positions leaving, and people that I know that have either expressed interest or leaving or have left.
Okay. Eric, I see a question for biocompatibility. There was a lot of work going on with chemical characterization and toxicological risk assessments as replacements for endpoint testing. Do you think that our strategies should lean more on endpoint strategies?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Marco. I think that it really does depend on what the device is, but we are seeing some sponsors take approaches where they're shifting back to the traditional animal testing instead of making chemical characterization and tox risk assessment their primary strategy. And that's especially the case when we have devices that are difficult to evaluate by chemistry because there's chemical incompatibilities between the solvents and the devices. That creates a very challenging sample to analyze. And so, again, we see some sponsors proposing to FDA and FDA accepting strategies that involve animal testing to address those endpoints. I can
Okay.
also say, I was also going to just mention that there's a chemical characterization draft guidance that went out last year, and comments closed at the end of last year. There was a lot of industry interest. There's a lot of comments received, particularly from the test laboratories, who of course are stakeholders in the chemical characterization process. And so we don't, I think, know yet what the timeline is for the guidance to be moved forward to finalization and what FDA's final perspective on all the details is going to be. But so I think when designing strategies like chemical characterization, it's just important to be very familiar with what FDA's expectations are. A lot of times, guidances are actually catching up to the policy that's been practiced by the agency over the years. And so just having that familiarity and being able to work with your test labs to ensure that the approaches that FDA is looking for, I think is going to be critically important. In addition, I think it's important to be aware of when a reviewer is potentially implementing something from the draft guidance or implementing or sending a request that's really not aligned with what has been done in the past for chemical characterization. And I think having that insight and working with advisors who can provide that insight for you is going to be really helpful so that you do know when to escalate certain issues versus when it's when the feedback is more typical for FDA feedback, and it's probably something that addressing it directly might be the most efficient route.
Okay. I'm seeing a lot of questions related to impact on pre-subs, and one specifically. So now there are hundreds of breakthrough devices, and this anonymous person has a client preparing to submit a de novo for a breakthrough device at the end of the year. They've already had 4 pre-subs, including the breakthrough. They're asking, do we think that breakthroughs will still get priority on application reviews given resource constraints and that there's hundreds of breakthroughs now? Are there certain offices that are more constrained than others? Debjani, do you want to speak to this one? Okay.
Yeah, sure. Just one point to clarify. The ability to expedite review ends for breakthroughs when you submit your marketing application. So your marketing application, that de novo has a timeline of its own. It really doesn't matter if you had a breakthrough device or not. In terms of the actual timelines, the set goals, right? Having said that, I think it's a really important point as with regard to breakthrough submissions such as sprints, like pre-marketing, even TAP submissions. What we're seeing actually from a lot of the teams that they're still prioritizing those reviews. So I do think it's still going on. What we can tell you is that, sprint discussions, they are as resource needed. That was how it was kind of uh, built. It wasn't a statutory deadline. It's not a MDUFA goal. However, we're still seeing FDA teams continuing to prioritize that, try to still make the longer or the shorter timeline. So I think I agree. There's a lot more breakthroughs, and I think just by that nature, things have slowed down where it is taking the agency a little bit longer. With regard to the layoffs, obviously it might take a bit longer than that, but we do still see that they are trying to prioritize. So really grateful to the agency for that.
Absolutely. There's another question about, do we expect delays to sprint discussions? And we have a colleague at MCRA who submitted a sprint, heard back from FDA that they wanted to review it more on a traditional pre-submission timeframe, and they were able to negotiate a middle ground. And so that's an opportunity to, I think if you are seeing delays, there's always an opportunity to go back to FDA and see if you reduce the number of questions or the scope of the topic, or if there's anything that you can do if timing's really important to your submission. I see a lot of questions related to impact on audits, whether they're routine audits, BIMO audits, or impact to the recall coordinating division. When we first touched base with FDA following the February 15th layoffs, the messaging that we were hearing is that there would be a big focus on safety. And I guess, what are you all seeing? Do you expect an impact on recalls, BIMO audits, or routine audits?
I don't think we've heard that much from our teams with regard to audits quite yet. I think routine inspections just in the wake of COVID, there was kind of a lot of things going on there. So I think FDA was actually trying to catch up quite a bit. What's going to happen now with additional layoffs, I'm not sure. I think with regard to PMAs, hopefully they'll still try and prioritize that, but it's unclear right now. I don't know about
Okay.
what you guys have heard, Alex or Eric.
I think just in general, with these types of actions, FDA is likely to, the management in these areas is likely to triage in the sense that they're going to focus on higher risk devices. They're going to focus on areas where public health may be the most at risk. And maybe you may see a slowing down of maybe lower risk and a prioritization of those things where timelines are associated, especially where there's a pre-market review. But I would think in general, when you have a shortage in these types of groups in the post-market, the resources are shifted, kind of where the risk demands.
There were obviously very different travel constraints during COVID, but we saw a big delay in foreign inspections. And so I think one thing that companies can do to de-risk their overall strategy. We have companies who work with very established manufacturers who have had recent FDA inspections, who have who are up to date on routine inspections for similar products, and occasionally FDA chooses not to inspect again for their PMA. So I think you're hearing a lot of the same themes, but this is really a good time to work with established manufacturers, established test labs, to really help de-risk your strategy. And I'm also seeing questions about, do we think that this will change the way that FDA reviews foreign data or submissions from foreign companies? I'm seeing specifically Germany as it comes to communication reviewing as opposed to submissions from US companies. I know biocompatibility is a bit of a different ballgame. Eric, there's concern from some foreign groups, and can you speak to that? I know that's not related to the layoffs, but maybe that'll lead into the other topics as well.
Sure, happy to speak for it. Speak to it. I think I think FDA is focused on the integrity of the studies that are being performed abroad as well as domestically. But unfortunately, what happened was some test labs were not providing real data, essentially, and that was eventually discovered by FDA. And there's been, I think, it's not been totally visible to me, but I think there's been a lot of effort to understand which labs are doing this and how can it be mitigated. And so just, I think last week, we saw an update with a letter from FDA indicating that they won't accept submissions that contain data from one laboratory in China, and there's others that have been named publicly as well as a concern for FDA. So I think you just want to be careful in selecting the laboratory, checking the credentials, and really having good communication with them, so that way you have the confidence to know that you're working with a laboratory that is reliable, and especially there's, I think, a lot of foreign laboratories, and in the biocompatibility space, there's a lot of different foreign laboratories, and FDA reviewers might not always be familiar with the test methods and the report formats from those laboratories. So I think it's helpful to check those before submitting them to FDA to make sure they really have everything that the agency would be looking for. That way your review can be expedited.
Great. And
sorry, Margaret, just to add to the clinical side of data that may be coming from, foreign sites. What we've seen is that FDA in general, they always have a concern about the generalizability of the foreign data to the US population. So I think that's also going to be the case here, in addition to the integrity of the data and, just making sure you're meeting GCP and all of that. But just the generalization argument, it becomes what we've seen, it's been the centerpiece of a lot of discussions with FDA and how much of that data you can generalize to the US population. Interestingly enough, recently we've also had a lot of pushback from human factors on human factor studies that are conducted outside of the US. So that's also something that we're recommending to clients to think about on whether they want to, conduct the studies US or versus the US.
okay. I see a question. Do you find that, do we expect that they'll approve lower risk products faster, given bandwidth constraints? And then there is, I think, another question about impact on third-party review program.
May be able to kind of touch on both of those. Lower risk devices, quite often when a reviewer's queue is full, and I'm just speaking more generically here, lower risk devices often receive just a little bit less attention, in the sense that the reviewer may go through the submission at large and just figure out whether this is something that they can, whether it's safe for them to take kind of a more high level approach with the submission. However, there's also a lot of review staff that goes through every submission in full detail. I think there's going to probably be a lot more pressure on those extremely detail oriented folks to either adapt the way that they're reviewing those submissions if especially when their queue starts to get into the tens and 20s or maybe even 30s of submissions that they're working on. So I do think that may be an effect. However, there's often a lot of review staff that's extremely dedicated to their job and public health, and oftentimes their answer to these situations is to work more hours. That often can affect the review quality for all the submissions that they're working on. So there's various types of impacts that I've seen from previous shutdown situations and from COVID. So it can vary, and actually sometimes those reviews can become a little bit more difficult because the review staff is following more of a template for the reviews. So oftentimes the deficiencies that you get back are more generic and less tailored to your device. So even for a low risk device, getting those types of deficiencies can actually extend the length of the submission and actually make it more likely that the submission would fail. Just simply because if you're getting a generic deficiency in your first round of review, it makes it more likely that FDA is going to have more questions on the second round of review, and you may either be in a situation where you would withdraw or FDA would say you didn't answer their questions. So there could be any one of those depending on the team and how many resources they have. On the third party question, obviously the third party organizations aren't affected directly because they're not government employees. So, I hadn't heard about an impact on the staff that manage third party review myself. But even so, if they were impacted, the amount of oversight for the review to continue by these third party organizations is likely to be unaffected in the short term. I do know that some of my clients have expressed new interest in the third-party review program. It often has held the promise for those low-risk devices to help them get through FDA more quickly. And we may have a situation where FDA has to trust these third-party reviewers a little more than usual to help kind of offload some of the review effort.
Thank you. So I think we have a follow-up question. Someone submitted, they want to know if we anticipate that there will be a US company first prioritization. And I have not heard of any sort of directive related to that and haven't seen that in practice. Has anyone else? No, I think so long as you're making arguments of why your data is generalizable, you're submitting everything translated to English right away and just really presenting it in the way that FDA expects. I don't find that FDA reviews OUS data sets, or submissions from OUS companies differently than US companies. Someone asks, can you talk about the pushback from industry to convince the administration not to pursue further layoffs? Who feels best first to speak to this? I do think we have seen a positive impact there. And yeah, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely work with some of the organizations that are out there and advocating for medical devices if you're able to, and make your voices heard. I think the review staff generally needs the support of this generally speaking small and tight-knit community in medical devices. We're a little small potentially compared to drugs and other parts of the agency, so it's important that those of you that have connections in Washington and are able to lobby and advocate, please get involved. Please make your voices heard because, in some ways, some of the goals of, bringing in, making sure these technologies are deployed and happen in the United States first, are going to be deeply impacted by some of these policy decisions. We need these folks at FDA in order to get some of these technologies to the market and make sure that they're safe and effective.
Thank you. I see another question about how do we think this will, the resource burden, how will this impact IDE reviews, Debjani, just given that they do have the shortest timeline with a 30-day timeline to decision?
Yeah, I think that's, the way the IDE statutory goal is built is that if they don't make a decision, it's automatically approved. Now, whether an IRB will ever accept that, I don't know, but FDA generally tends to prioritize IDEs above all else, like even marketing submission, because of this potential to let something go that has a significant risk and be trialed in a clinical study. So I don't think actually IDE timelines will be impacted. What I do believe is that if there is further reductions in the workforce, you're going to start seeing a lot more disapprovals. FDA just is not going to have the bandwidth to interact with you during that interactive submission or then that interactive period in order to resolve deficiencies. So, the way you want to think about an IDE is really, or perhaps one of the quickest ways to get feedback on a decision of whether it's an approval or disapproval. But at least for the safety and concerns. Now, the study design considerations, that's a different matter altogether, but you can always submit a supplement to address those as well. But what I believe is going to happen is they're just going to have a lot less interaction with you, and you just might be getting disapprovals. So, and that's okay. It's a way for you to work through it.
And we see in working with OHT6 that sometimes if there's just simply not enough time to review an IDE and make a decision in 30 days, they will reach out to discuss converting to a Q sub to allow them more time to continue their review. I guess, presented that situation, what would you recommend?
Yeah.
Pushing for a decision or accepting the conversion?
Yeah, so it really depends, right? So if you knew going in, there's some reviewers that are they're like, this is so deficient. You have such a large gap in us getting to approval that a pre-sub makes sense. And that may be the case for a lot of companies, right? They have investors that they have particular timelines and that's why they submitted, whatever the considerations are. But if it's not that case, if you're somewhere in the middle ground, I highly recommend going through the entire process and getting a disapproval letter, because that basically narrows down all the items that you need to cover in order to get to an approval. So when you submit your IDE amendment, all you're doing is responding to those disapproval deficiencies. So it basically narrows it down. So for the most part, I will say go through the entire process, get that letter, and be really clear upfront that, we believe it's in a good place and we would like to go through the entire process. We don't think that we're going to go through a pre-submission. So then FDA, the review team, has that in their mind that they have to write a disapproval letter and that they need to go through multiple levels of concurrence in order to get that out. So,
Right.
I think it's just a strategy, but it just depends on how the quality of the submission when it went in.
Right. And I guess one benefit too of pushing for a decision, even if you know it's going to be disapproval, is that you get to see what's above the line, what must be addressed, and what's below the line in terms of future considerations, study design considerations. Yeah, that's good. So I see another question. Given the change of focus regarding minority groups, do you anticipate a change in how FDA will treat studies that focus on diversity? Does anyone have a strong feeling there? I guess I recently had a conversation with FDA leadership on this because they have removed that guidance. And I did see a question about ensuring diversity in the clinical study that I was working on. And this is a one case, but in my experience, it seems that they are still interested in ensuring diversity in clinical studies because of the differences in the way that the disease may behave or the technology may work. And so this is more of a concern of safety as opposed to other, I guess, concerns of diversity directives. Okay, let's see. New questions. I don't know if any of you guys have anything to add to diversity discussions or if you've seen anything in your recent interactions.
I can touch on it briefly. Some of the guidance that FDA had out there has come back, and you can kind of use the Google Wayback Machine to see the differences in those guidances. Often it seems FDA's focus on those, or I should say the administration's focus on those, was removing language on sex and gender differences being part of those guidances. However, with them coming back, and kind of my experience with recent deficiencies and letters for various types of submissions, is they still continue to have a focus on making sure that devices work for everyone. So I would encourage people to continue making sure that their devices and their validation testing is done on a populations that is representative of the United States population.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for jumping in on that. And I see another question. Do you think, or have you heard that small business user fee discounts will be eliminated next fiscal year? Do you think this could happen under current cost cutting? I haven't heard anything to that effect. Okay. I have spoken with a small business office, and if anyone's seeing a bit of a slower review than we're used to in last year's, they did just switch from paper submissions to an electronic system. But so far, I've seen everything reviewed as normal. So someone asks, do you recommend reaching out to your review team to assess the staff changes in status? Johnny, I know you guys sent a very human check-in on all of your projects.
Yeah, I think, it's something that I usually do. It's I think those layoffs are so sudden, trying to assess how this review team is going to be impacted. What happened in certain cases is that management and the rest of the review team didn't even have access to those files that other review team members may have been working on that were let go, right? So having that understanding and being at the FDA before, it was mostly just saying like, hey, we're really sorry for what's going on. How can we help you? And what is the best way to get these folks up to speed? And, just suggesting whether a walkthrough is helpful. And I will tell you, most of those team members and ADs were more than grateful for us to do that, even though we had just done it with a review team like a month ago.
Right,
So.
right. That's great. I see a question about guidance work, and is there any news about when the CDRH news and updates will come back? This question saying that service has been halted since January 21st. I guess, Eric, you're on your way to a conference now. What is FDA participation like in conferences, webinars, working groups? Are you expecting that to come back?
I have heard that participation is increasing, but at the meeting that I'm at currently, which this is the Society of Toxicology meeting, which there's great interest from FDA from biocompatibility perspective, but really across the federal government, I don't think I'm not aware of seeing any government employees at this meeting, and it's usually about 15% government employees from what I've heard in the past. So so this particular meeting is strongly impacted, and we've seen, I think it's still dynamic though. I think that what I'm hearing is that some of the interactions are starting to return to normal, but I think things like travel might be some of the last things to come back.
Right, right. Okay. All right. Thank you. And thank you for the many questions. I know we have about 5 minutes left. And there are many questions about, do we anticipate further reductions, further rifts, layoffs, further impact? I guess just considering if there will be any further impact, what are your recommendations for industry, just how people can de-risk their current submission strategy, what they can do if they have a submission in-house with FDA now. I guess starting with Alex, do you have any final recommendations?
I'd say probably one of the first things, you know, and hopefully some of my FDA colleagues out there hearing this is make sure to give the review team a little bit of grace. They're under a lot of pressure. They are doing their best to get these reviews to you as quickly as possible. Communicate while you can. Communicate when you can, and when there's opportunities to do so, be patient. I would say some of the other things that you may want to be doing is offering review staff basically a walkthrough of your device if they have time for it. And at the end of the day, make sure that you're bringing good resources into your own development, whether that's, consultants from MCRA and bringing experts into your team so that you are bringing that experience to building your submission, making sure that you're delivering a high quality submission kind of the first time that you submit. But also just kind of understanding that, with the lack of Q subs and various things like that, you may have to change your expectations for what the first round of review may look like. It may end up in a withdrawal or an NSE, but I would highly encourage you to don't necessarily see failure on a first 510K as an extremely negative thing, because when you fail on a first round, you can come back for a second round of that 510K. So technically you do get another hold. It's just a little bit longer and you do have to resubmit your 510K, but maybe set your expectations accordingly to those review cycles. I'll pass things off to my colleagues here, maybe if there's other points they'd like to make.
Yeah, just for me, I think one recommendation I would make just is really strategically thinking about your strategy. If you think there is a more aggressive or novel strategy that you want to take, realize that takes interactions to resolve, right? So build that interaction time in. Like Alex said, that might mean several disapprovals, and that's okay. Or it may mean that you don't decide to do those high risk and you just go with what's been done previously, right? So I think it just needs a little bit more of a strategic consideration at this juncture of review.
Eric?
Sure, and I'll just quickly add that I think just taking responsibility for the biological safety of your device is so important. And I realize that might be a little bit obvious, but it really helps FDA a lot when you think through all the potential biological risks that your device could introduce and come up with a really clear and thorough strategy for how you're addressing that. I think it makes FDA's job just so much easier, and then you can work with FDA as a partner in working through that submission in order to get to a place where that device can be put on the market.
Great, great. And maybe I'll just add, on the same the thought of really doing what you can to help them with the walkthroughs, working with strong test labs, but also file organization. This is not a time for a data dump. Be really quick in your responses to FDA so that it's still top of mind for everyone who wrote the interactive request. And if you're sending a really long test report, if you could annotate it and say, this is exactly where you're going to find what you've asked for, I think that can go a long way too, and people don't have a lot of time. But all really great questions, great recommendations. And thank you. You guys can also, if you follow-up questions, please reach out to us, info@micra.com, or directly to us. We're first initial last name @micra.com. So thank you everyone for joining.